The cab pulled up to the curb, and I sat there for a moment, just staring through the window. After 8 months volunteering with Doctors Without Borders in South Sudan, the sight of a Canadian suburb in October should have felt like a gift. The maple trees along the street had gone full amber. The air outside would smell like wood smoke and cold. I had dreamed about this exact moment in a tent outside Juba while listening to generator hum and distant rainfall. Then I saw the lockbox on my front door. Not a lockbox like the kind my neighbor uses when she goes to Florida for the winter. This was a realtor's lockbox. A bright orange one, clamped to the handle of the door I had painted myself 2 summers ago in a color called Harbor Mist. Sitting on my front steps, drinking Tim Hortons out of paper cups like they owned the place, were my older sister Diane and her husband Greg. Diane didn't wave. She just looked at me the way she always does, like I'm a problem she hasn't finished solving yet. Greg checked his phone. I paid the driver, pulled my duffel off the back seat, and walked up the path I had laid myself, stone by stone, the summer I turned 28. "You're going to want to sit down," Diane said. "I'm fine standing," I said. She shrugged like she'd expected that. "We listed it 3 months ago. Accepted an offer in September. The buyer takes possession November 1st. She checked her watch 17 days from now." I looked at the lockbox. I looked at Greg, who was suddenly very interested in a crack in the driveway concrete. I looked back at my sister. "You listed my house," I said. "Our parents' house," she corrected. "Technically." And there it was, the word she'd been saving since the day I left. Technically. Before I tell you what was sitting in the inside pocket of my jacket that was about to make that lockbox completely irrelevant, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this reaches. My name is Claire, and I'm 31 years old. I'm a registered nurse who has spent the last 4 years doing rotations with international medical organizations, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, and before that, Northern Manitoba with a First Nations health partnership. I'm not telling you that to impress you. I'm telling you because the version of me that stepped out of that cab had spent 8 months making life or death decisions in conditions that would make most people quit on day 3. Panic was not in my vocabulary anymore. Diane had always mistaken my calm for weakness. That mistake was about to cost her. The house had belonged to my parents. My mother died when I was 22, my father 4 years later. They left the property jointly to Diane and me, but the will included a specific clause, one my father's lawyer had helped him draft carefully, stating that neither party could sell, transfer, or encumber the property without written consent from both. My father had been a quiet man, but he was not a naive one. He had watched Diane's relationship with money for 40 years. He had planned accordingly. What Diane had done, what I pieced together standing on that driveway while the October wind cut through my field jacket, was this. She had found a notary in Mississauga, willing to witness a consent document she had signed on my behalf while I was unreachable in the field. She told him I had given verbal consent over a satellite call, and that the paperwork was a formality. She had forged my signature. Then she and Greg had listed the property through a discount brokerage, accepted a cash offer from a developer named Mitchell, who wanted to knock the house down and build a fourplex, and were 11 days from handing him the keys. The money, according to Diane's very calm explanation delivered like she was reading from a condo newsletter, was going to pay off the line of credit she and Greg had run up renovating their own home in Oakville. $412,000 of equity in my parents' house, the house I'd lived in, maintained, paid property taxes on, and loved, was going to become a new kitchen and a 3-car garage in a suburb 40 minutes away. It was sitting empty half the year anyway. Greg offered, not looking up from his phone. "I was in South Sudan," I said, "treating cholera patients." "Right, well," he put his phone away. "Not exactly a stable living situation, is it?" I looked at him for a long moment. Greg had never worked a day outside of his family's HVAC company. He had soft hands and strong opinions about property values. I had watched a 9-year-old girl die of a preventable disease 6 weeks ago and held her mother while she screamed. I did not have the energy to explain to Greg what a stable living situation looked like. "Who's the buyer?" I asked. "His name is Mitchell Harding," Diane said. "He's a developer. Cash deal. No conditions. He's coming by this afternoon, actually, to do a final measurement for his architect." She said it like she was proud of the efficiency, like she had managed something. "Claire, the market isn't going to stay like this. We needed to move." "We?" I picked up my duffel and walked past her to sit on the porch railing. I needed 30 seconds to think, and I needed to look like I was doing nothing at all. In the field, I had learned that the most dangerous thing you can do in a crisis is let the other people in the room see you recalibrate. You stay still, you breathe, you let them think they've already won. Because here is what Diane did not know. Before I left for South Sudan, I had spent an afternoon with my parents' estate lawyer, a meticulous woman named Patricia who had handled my father's will and who had been quietly appalled by Diane's behavior during the probate process. Patricia had advised me to do something I had initially thought was excessive. She had suggested I establish a bare trust, with myself as the sole beneficiary and trustee, and transfer my half-interest in the property into that trust before I left the country. The reasoning was simple. A trust interest cannot be sold, signed away, or forged out of existence the same way a personal property interest can. It exists in a separate legal container. Any transaction purporting to convey the full property without the trust's written authorization, executed by the trustee, which was me, was not a sale. It was a document with my forged signature on it. I had done exactly what Patricia suggested. I had the certified trust deed in a waterproof document sleeve in the inside pocket of my field jacket. I had carried it across 2 continents because Patricia had said, very calmly, with respect to your sister's history, I would not leave this in a filing cabinet. I had thought she was being dramatic at the time. I heard a truck in the driveway before I saw it. A black F-150. Clean. The kind of truck that has never seen mud. Mitchell Harding stepped out. He was 50-something, tan in the particular way of men who golf rather than work outdoors, wearing a vest over a button-down. He looked at the house the way people look at things they've already mentally demolished. The seller's daughter? He said, nodding at me with the mild courtesy of someone who expects no friction. The co-owner? I said. Something flickered across his face. He looked at Diane. I told you she was back, Diane said quickly. It's fine. She's been fully briefed. We just need to wrap up the interior measurements, and we can finalize the closing timeline. Mitchell looked back at me. I smiled at him. It was the smile I use when a patient's family member is about to make a decision I already know is wrong, and I'm waiting for them to finish so I can explain reality. Go right ahead, I said, and I opened the front door for him. Diane blinked. She had expected a fight on the porch. She had expected the version of me that used to cry in the kitchen over her passive-aggressive comments at Christmas dinner. She got a nurse who had triaged a mass casualty event in 43-degree heat. She got someone who had already calculated every exit. Mitchell and his assistant went inside with a laser measure. Diane followed, shooting me a look I recognized from 30 years of sisterhood. The look that means, I will deal with you later. Greg wandered in after them, hands in his pockets. I stayed on the porch. I could hear them inside. Mitchell talking about setbacks and lot coverage. His assistant calling out numbers. Diane making small agreeable sounds. The deal that was supposed to erase me from this house, from my parents' legacy, from $400,000 of my future, was being measured in real time 12 feet away. I let it happen. In medicine, you learn not to intervene before the moment of maximum clarity. You wait until everyone in the room understands the stakes. Then, you act. Mitchell came back out 20 minutes later, looking satisfied. He had a folder in his hand, some closing documents, transfer of title paperwork, the kind of thing a developer carries when he's done this 100 times and considers it routine. Everything looks straightforward, he said. Patricia at the brokerage has the consent documentation from both owners. We're set for November 1st. He extended the folder toward Diane. Just need your counter-signature on the transfer confirmation. Actually, I said, I'd like to see the consent documentation. Silence. Mitchell looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has never had a woman interrupt a real estate transaction and isn't sure how to categorize it. Sorry? The written consent from both owners, I said, required under the terms of the joint tenancy established in my father's will. I'd like to see the document. Diane's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Mitchell opened his folder and handed me a single page. I looked at it. The signature on the line marked Claire Beaumont was, impressively, quite close to mine. Diane had practiced, but it wasn't mine. The loop on the capital B was wrong, and I make a very specific small mark after the T in Beaumont that my father used to tease me about, a habit from a teacher in grade 4. It wasn't there. This isn't my signature, I said. Claire. Diane's voice had dropped to a register I recognized. Quiet, controlled, dangerous. The voice she used when she wanted me to understand that a scene would be bad for everyone. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything, I said pleasantly. I'm identifying a forged document in a real estate transaction. Mr. Harding, I think you should call your lawyer. The color left Mitchell's face with impressive speed. Cash buyers who skip conditions are gamblers by nature, but no developer wants to hear the word forged on a title transfer 2 weeks before closing. What do you mean forged, he said. I was in South Sudan until 36 hours ago, I said. I did not sign this document. I did not give verbal consent over any call, satellite or otherwise, and my half interest in this property is not held personally. It was transferred into a registered bear trust 14 months ago. I took the document sleeve from my jacket pocket and unfolded the certified trust deed on top of Mitchell's folder. My father's will requires written consent from both owners for any disposition of this property. I am the sole trustee of the trust that holds my interest. That means any sale requires my signature in my capacity as trustee, witnessed, and notarized. This document I held up, the forged consent form, is not that. This is wire fraud if that money moves across provincial lines, and it's forgery under the Criminal Code of Canada regardless. Mitchell took the trust deed from me with the hands of a man who has just realized he is standing in a minefield. He read it. Then he read it again. Then he looked at Diane with an expression that had nothing professional left in it. "You told me both owners had consented," he said. "She has," Diane said, but her voice had lost its architecture. "She's just being difficult. We can work this out. Mitchell, I've been handling this property for years while she's been overseas. Someone had to—" "You forged her signature," Mitchell said. "It wasn't a question. I had every reason to believe you forged her signature on a title transfer." He closed his folder. "I wired $412,000 into your trust account last Thursday." The specific silence that followed was the kind I've only heard a few times in my life. Once in a field hospital when a generator cut out mid-surgery. Once when I called my father on his birthday and the phone rang and rang. The silence of a moment that has fully arrived and cannot be walked back. "Reverse it," Mitchell said. His voice was flat and very quiet. The golfing ease was completely gone. "Call your lawyer right now and reverse that wire transfer. That is my investor's money." Diane put her coffee cup down on the porch railing very carefully, like she was trying to prove she was still in control of small things. "The funds were used to consolidate our line of credit," she said. "The bank processed it Friday." "What?" "We needed to act quickly before the interest rate." "You spent my money." Mitchell's voice cracked on the last word. $400,000. Investors. Mitchell Harding was not buying this house with his own equity. He was managing other people's capital. And Diane had spent it on a kitchen renovation. "Get it back," he said. "Get every dollar back into that account by end of business today, or I am calling the RCMP and I will not be stopping there." "We can't," Greg said from the doorway. He had gone pale in the specific way of men who understand money better than consequences. "The bank applied it directly to the HELOC. It's already been credited. To reverse it, we'd have to reopen the line, and the bank won't." "I don't care," Mitchell said. He already had his phone out. I stepped back. I leaned against the porch post with my arms folded, and I watched my sister understand what she had done. Not the forgery, not the fraud, those she had talked herself into believing were pragmatic. What I watched her understand was that there was no version of this conversation with a good ending for her. The money was spent. The document was forged. I was standing on the driveway with proof. And the man she had defrauded had investors to answer to. The RCMP arrived 40 minutes later. 2 officers, a corporal and a constable. They were polite, in the Canadian way of law enforcement, that still hopes everyone involved is going to be reasonable. I gave them the trust deed, the forged consent document, and my passport showing my entry stamps. I had photos on my phone from South Sudan dated the same week the consent form was supposedly signed, time-stamped and geotagged. Diane tried 3 different approaches in the space of those 40 minutes. First, she tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding about the scope of her authority. Then she said I had always known about the sale and changed my mind at the last minute out of spite. Then, when the corporal asked for a third time to see the original power of attorney she claimed gave her signing authority, she started crying. Real tears, which surprised me. I had thought she was past that. Greg said very little. Greg had the look of a man rehearsing what he was going to tell his own lawyer. The corporal spoke to me privately on the driveway while the constable took Diane's statement on the porch. "You're not pressing charges right now?" he asked. "I'm providing the documentation," I said. "I'll be guided by the Crown." He nodded. Smart. Mitchell had taken a call from his own lawyer and was pacing the street. I heard fragments. Clawback, recovery action, fraudulent misrepresentation. The deal was dead. The question now was how he was going to recover his investors' money from a HELOC that had already been credited to a bank in Oakville, and that was going to be a long and unpleasant process involving civil litigation that I did not envy anyone. At some point, Diane came to stand beside me. The officers were conferring by their cruiser. Greg had gone to sit in their car, which was still parked in my driveway. "I didn't think you'd actually come back," she said. I looked at her. "To my house? You're never here. You're always somewhere else. Always doing something more important than anything happening here. She said it without much heat, more like she'd been carrying it a long time and was tired of the weight. Mom and Dad's house was just sitting here and we had the debt, and I thought, you thought I wouldn't find out, I said. She didn't answer. Or, I said, you thought that even if I found out, I'd let it go because I always let things go, because making peace was easier than fighting with you. I turned to face her properly. I've spent 8 months watching people fight for things that matter to them. Clean water, medicine, a chance for their kids. You tried to take the one place in the world that was mine, the one thing Mom and Dad left for both of us, and you used my absence to do it. And you thought my caring about something bigger than this house meant I didn't care about the house. She was quiet. I cared about the house, I said. That's why I set up the trust before I left. The corporal came back. He explained that a file would be opened, that both she and Greg would be contacted, that she should retain a lawyer before making any further statements. He was very professional about it. Diane nodded at each sentence like she was taking meeting minutes. When they left, she and Greg drove away without speaking to me again. Mitchell's truck sat in the street for another hour while he worked the phone. At one point, he came to the porch and said, without preamble, I'm sorry. I should have done more due diligence. I got complacent on cash deals. You might want to factor in title insurance going forward, I said. He laughed once, short and unhappy. Yeah. He looked at the house. It's a good house. It is, I said. He left. The lockbox was still on the door handle. I went to my car, got the bolt cutters I'd bought at a Canadian Tire on the way from Pearson, and removed it. It took about 30 seconds. The hasp fell into my hand, and I stood there holding it. This orange thing that had been hanging on my parents' front door for 3 months while I was 12 time zones away, not knowing. I set it on the curb. Inside, the house smelled like it always does in October. A little dust, old wood, the ghost of my mother's cooking embedded in 30 years of kitchen walls. Someone had moved the furniture against the walls, probably for viewings. I put the couch back where it belonged. I turned the heat on. I filled the kettle. Later that evening, Patricia called me. I had emailed her from the airport. The trust held, she said. It held, I said. Diane's going to have a rough few months. I know. The civil claim from the developer alone. I know. Patricia paused. You don't sound satisfied. I thought about that. I was sitting on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and a mug of tea going cold in my hands because I'd forgotten to drink it. The house was mine. The trust had worked exactly as designed. My sister was going to face real legal consequences for what she'd done. Everything had resolved in the precise direction I'd spent 14 months preparing for. I'm not sad for her, I said. I want to be clear about that. What she did was a choice, and it was a serious one, and I'm not going to perform guilt about how it ended. But she said she didn't think I'd come back. Silence on the line. Not like she didn't think I'd die, I said. She just stopped counting on me to exist in this particular context. Like I'd opted out. Like going somewhere hard meant I'd given up my claim to something here. I stared at the ceiling. I keep thinking about all the versions of this where I didn't set up the trust, where I just trusted her because she's my sister and we share parents and I thought that counted for something. I almost didn't do it. Patricia, I genuinely almost didn't do it because it felt paranoid. I remember, she said, dry. You were very calm about telling me my instincts were wrong. It's part of the service? I laughed. First time in a while. I called my team lead in South Sudan that night 6 hours ahead and told her I was going to take my full repatriation leave before the next rotation. She said good. She said I sounded tired. She was right. I slept in my childhood bedroom with the window cracked the way my father always kept it, even in October, because he said fresh air was better medicine than anything a pharmacy sold. The maple tree outside was losing the last of its leaves. I could hear them on the roof, one at a time, the way autumn sounds when you're finally somewhere quiet enough to notice. The RCMP file was opened. Diane retained a lawyer. The civil proceedings between Mitchell and my sister and Greg have been ongoing and are expected to take time, which is how these things go in Canada when money has already been spent and everyone is technically solvent. The fraudulent consent document was submitted to the Crown's office. I was told charges were likely. I had the locks rekeyed. I repainted the front door in the spring, same color, Harbor Mist, because I like it and because it was my choice to make. The lockbox went in the recycling. It's the smallest victory in all of this, but it's the one I come back to. That orange thing on the curb and the sound the door made when I opened it with my own key. If you've ever had to protect yourself from someone who confused your kindness for permission, share this with someone who needs to hear it.